What we want to do tonight is, I'm going to give a very brief intro, and then David Anderson and Steve are going to give the Parks and Facilities Master Plan feedback. They'll talk about it. That's a process that started at the beginning of this year, and we want to go through the prioritization and result of that. I'm going to go through the CROA 2020 budget overview. Going to be from a high-level perspective. We sent out letters last week, but I want to really talk about the big picture and kind of tie it a little bit into the Parks and Facilities Plan. Vanessa is going to talk about the Charter Task Force update and really all the good work there and what we're going to need you to do. And then we'll do Q&A at the end. So we're not going to do Q&A during the event, but we're going to do it at the end, and then we'll ask you to come up so we can get your pretty face on the camera and everybody can see you, because we do get a lot of people who watch these from home and live stream and stuff like that. So we thank you for being out here. Oh, I'm Brian Kinsel. I am the CROA president. We've got the full board here other than Mary Ann. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve and David.
Give me one quick second to get this PowerPoint up.
And these slides will show up on that TV or this TV. I hope they're on that TV back there, right? Yeah. So if you want to position yourself to see better, you can look at that TV, or you can even turn the TV a little if you want, if it would help people in the back.
Well, I have no idea why it's showing multiple slides here. Let me see if...
There's only one up there.
Oh, is it working up there? Oh, maybe I should turn around and look. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to be talking with you tonight about the Facilities and Parks Master Plan that we initiated last year at the end of 2018 and really began our work in early part of 2019. But I'm going to give you a little bit more history and background to the master planning process. In 2014, when I arrived at Celebration, there was some initiatives that were taking place to look at, well, first you all had voted yourself a additional 1 year's assessment for all new home sales that were taking place in the community. So you started getting a guaranteed revenue stream in for park improvements and for amenity enhancements. So there was some data that was in place through a stakeholder meeting that took place in 2013, early 2014. And I believe it was in this room where you put dots up on a board on some of the facilities that you'd like to see in the community. Then there was also a community-wide survey that took place in 2010, 2011. So there was some data from that. So in 2015, the CROA board put together a master plan task force, and it put together the first master plan for Celebration. So in 2019, we wanted to update that because the data that was utilized for that first plan was around 9-10 years old. So we built some major projects off of that original plan. And the two items that floated to the top on that plan were dog park and athletic fields. So as you can see today, we have a beautiful dog park with a small dog park side and a large dog park side, and we have a 3-field athletic field complex. So the question is, what do we do next? And the CROA board talked about it with us, with management, and we felt it was very important to bring in a third party instead of trying to do this one in-house, so we could get an unbiased third-party opinion and gather some data to put together this new future master plan for you that hopefully will be here with this community for the next 10 to 15 years as you continue building and utilizing that great funding source that you have. So we started this process by putting out a proposal, and we had 4 different agencies that we put it out to. It was AECOM, Barth Associates, Community Solutions Group, and Los Design. And Los Design was ultimately selected to start this master planning process. So tonight we're going to, as our discussion outline, we're going to talk a little bit about the process that took place for the master plan, for the 2019 master plan, what those results look like, and David, who is really good at taking data and analyzing it and putting it onto graphs for you to understand, he's going to present that to you. And then we'll talk to you a little bit about planning considerations. It's not going to be up on the screen, but the master plan firm gave us some planning considerations within the overall master plan. So we should have that master plan report available for anybody that wants to go through the 80-plus pages or so of that. It should be up online for you to look at soon. And then we'll talk a little bit about the report, but we'll talk a lot at the end about what is the next steps and ultimately how do we spend the money? So the money comes in and accumulates, but a lot of you want a lot of different projects, so you're going to see what those look like, and we're going to talk about the CROA board getting together, working with management to do a lot of town hall meetings and workshops to really kind of discuss what we're building next and how we're going to do it. For the process, in 2019, we had Lowe's Design as the independent consultant, really looked at a three-pronged process to develop this master plan. The first was in January. We had a kickoff meeting, and it was very similar to Jeffrey Mowen's meeting in 2014, where the rooms were open, there were boards up, and I believe everybody got 8 to 10 dots, and you were allowed to put those dots where you wanted to for facilities that you wanted to see in the future. The next step in this process were focus group meetings. And first off, on the public meetings, you're going to see some data on the next slide related to what the outcome of that meeting was. I want you all to remember that this was a three-pronged process as we went through it. So not one part of the process drives what the next steps are, but all three have to be taken into consideration. So we will have a slide that shows you what the outcome of that meeting was. But we also had focus group meetings in February, and all of the different groups, our civic and service groups, our program partner providers, youth sports, the different committees, the management team and the CROA board all took place in that. And that's a lot of quantitative data, quality data that was used to develop the questions for the survey. So we had surveys that went out, and we had 769 homeowner responses. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There were 769 responses from homeowners. I'm not sure the total number, 4,000.
The number of surveys that went out would be 4,321, one to each
Well,
homeowner.
yeah, and it was open too, so homeowners could respond.
I didn't think it went to every home.
It did.
Yeah, every homeowner had an opportunity to respond. So our results from the public meeting, you can see them if I click over on screen here. You can see in the blue, the biggest chunk from that meeting was community center. It was about 41%. The second biggest chunk was pickleball courts at 24%. Third, we have performing arts center at 15%. And then parking showed up at 12%. And then rounding it out was a playground at Artisan Park at 8%. And I know there's probably going to be some more discussion tonight about the playground.
But that's from the public meeting in January.
Just the public meeting only. So this is the first prong of this, and this was counting up all the dots that were done at that public meeting. So the next phase then was through the survey, and Mr. Anderson is going to talk to you a little bit about that.
Thank you. Good introduction, Steve. So in the survey that did go to all residents, there were 22 questions. You will not see 22 slides. You will not see 22 slides. Some of them are about what are your patterns, if you go elsewhere, what do you look for elsewhere? And remember, the survey was looking at facilities and parks. So it's looking at the whole range of amenities that we can build here. So we're going to look at 4 of these. This first one was, the question was, and we've written it at the bottom, in previous public meetings, and by the way, the public meetings was that meeting in this room in January of a year ago when the dots were put on the walls, on the items. You just saw those results. And from the focus groups. Both of those help inform our results, but they also help to inform what the survey questions were. Because we wanted not a stock questionnaire, but a questionnaire that served us. So, how important, you can blow that up to the big slideshow?
When you corrected
No?
he said,
Yeah, there we go. No, not on this one. No, this, oh, that's weird. Go back to, let's do the next, try the next slide. That's weird. Okay, so here's what the results show. I don't know what happened. You want to just go back to the prior?
It was when we
Yeah. But that shouldn't have changed. Shouldn't have changed.
just a minute ago.
Yes. So these, these are the, we asked about 13 items. How important is this item for you? These parks or facilities, how important is it for you to have? Okay, that was the question. These are in order. The top one was parking. It was a 5-point scale, 5 being extremely important and 1 being not at all important. So if you can imagine that, those brown lines going, cascading down. Yeah, just pull it up. So the parking was the top, and it was like a 3.5 on a 5-point scale. That's where it came out. Right below that was community center, performing arts facility. These were all distinct items. There were everyone's voting 1 through 5. So what everyone voted on all of these 13. There's no waiting. Everyone voted on all 13 items. If someone chose to not vote on parking, then they didn't vote. I can actually pull up the numbers. I can tell it to you now of how many actually voted on that question of parking. Basically, it was like at the 90% range. So community center was slightly below, about a 3.4. Performing arts might have been a 3.3, followed by active adult and senior center. Indoor gym and game courts, these are all about a 3.3. Splash pads, it goes down a little bit. You're down to a 3. East Crescent restroom, pickleball courts, playground, Artisan Park playground, shuffleball courts, Artisan Park amphitheater restroom, croquet courts, and bocce ball courts. So those last ones from pickleball and playground at Artisan Park were about 2.5, and bocce ball was about 2.3. So it goes from a low of 2.3 to a high of 3.5. That's your scores. That's the scores overall. How important is that? Then just to highlight there, right there. So that's what I was just saying. So you're at a 2.5, 2.4 on these lower ones. Pickleball was one of the high-numbered one in the dots, community-wide. It's not one of the top 5. Okay?
So this is out of 700.
This is 769 people responding. Okay? The next slide is the same slide with 5 arrows. Those 5 came out high 5 years ago. Because one of the questions, and Steve talked about the history of facilities master plan, one of the questions through the process is, well, are you throwing out the old master plan? No, we're folding that in and considering it, and here's where those items came out for our residents today. That's what our residents today said. It's the same numbers. Now, we asked a different question. We asked a different question, which is the next slide. So this is a little cumbersome. Just look at the top slide. We said, please indicate your time prioritization for each of the items below for which you marked relatively important or extremely important. You with me? So someone had to mark it 4 or 5 on a 5-point scale. And then you got to answer this. Now, I know that many of us remember on the actual survey, anyone could have answered this. When I got the raw data on Friday, what's that, 5 days ago? So I went and manually mined it to get that data. Okay? So I only counted those people who said those 2 top items, who followed the instructions and said, when do you want it? So if you look at parking, 50% they said they wanted in the next year. That's what they said. That's what you said. 50%, and then the raw numbers are right there. The short term I think we said was a couple of years, then medium or intermediate term, and then long term. So 10% said I'm willing to wait about 10 years. If you go to bocce ball courts, 43% right at the bottom said I can wait about 10 years. Only 9% of the people who thought bocce ball was very important said let's get it done in the next year. So what this says is lots of people want things, I don't want to say yesterday, but tomorrow. Fast forwarding to next steps is as we said at the beginning of the process, Steve mentioned it already, we'll reiterate it again, we've got to sort all of this out because we can't do it all tomorrow. Feasibility doesn't allow that, money doesn't allow that. Each of these has a lot of planning, okay? And then there's a decision also with parking, is that really in our purview? We don't own the streets, that's county streets. We own limited amount of land that we can still develop. So these are all things to work through, but it becomes input to us. So those are the major data points. Steve has the next slide, which has two other questions that we asked. Do you want to do that? Yep. Yeah. And I'll come back to that.
More data for the board to consider as they're prioritizing and talking about their next steps moving forward. So these questions are related to budgeting and funding, and the first one is approximately $750,000 a year is coming in, and I talked earlier about that resales of the homes and that extra assessment that's coming in. So around $750,000, and so when we asked how many of the residents would like to do immediate or short-term versus long-term projects, it really is a coin flip, but 54% of the residents want the funding budgeted for immediate or short-term projects. And the next question, how would you allocate this funding between improvements on existing facilities or investment in new facilities? And again, a coin flip, at 51% of residents want funding allocated to improvement of existing facilities. So again, board has a lot of information here to work with on determining what the next level prioritization is. So we have some great news and we have some challenging news here as we move forward. So as we look at the funding consideration, CROA in 2019 with about $400,000 of working capital, and if you pay attention to any of the board meetings, you hear Brian say it and Vaughn say it at just about every meeting. We have around 300 something now. We should end the year around 400,000. Historically, we bring in about $700,000 a year. Island Village sales are going to help because every time a new home in Island Village is sold, that homeowner is going to pay that assessment, and then if they turn around and sell it to somebody else, that resale will bring in another year's worth of annual assessments. So we're looking at, in 2021, a possibility of $200,000, $300,000 annually, working capital through 2026. So it is feasible that CROA could raise $6 to $7 million of working capital for projects through 2026, but it's not all here right now. So CROA does have the ability to incur debt with a public vote if desired, and that question was in the plan also. And I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but there was a contingency of residents that said, yeah, we're willing to consider alternative options. So another thing for the board to consider. And CROA has learned that it's very important to consider any ongoing reserve balance costs for new facilities, buildings, those types of things. You have to replace roofs, you have to replace air conditioning units. All of those long-term costs have to be considered. And also, what's the run rate? How much is the ongoing maintenance and operation going to cost in the staffing level for the different facilities? So those are the different funding considerations. And now working with the CROA board and the management team, we could talk about next steps and how do we do this and what are we going to do. So I'll turn that back over to David.
So the short version on the next steps is the board saw or has seen the draft report. This is a draft report, close to final, soon to be ready for public reading. A couple little tweaks left to be done. The board has not yet discussed this. These slides that you just saw with the data mined in a pretty straightforward way. First time the board saw a draft was Sunday or Monday? Monday. So this is all new. We have not yet workshopped it. We have not talked about it. What I think is powerful as we talk about next steps is we have data. We want to blend the data from the different sources and then ongoing discussions. We haven't talked about what the process is going to be. But what I think is important and exciting in this community is we can talk about these. I don't think this board and I don't think future boards will respond to just, clamoring. I think we just want a reasoned process. Steve just said, what's the real cost and what's going to be the run rate? Let's look at all the considerations because these facilities are going to last for a long time. So we're going to start talking about these priorities now and then what would be an appropriate process. What's the process so we can make some decisions? Clearly, the last data, the two pieces of data that you had about should we invest for new things or old things and long-term and short-term. And there's a lot of different opinions on that. And so we've got to put all that together. And so I think the workshops are going to be pretty lively. Board meetings in the future are going to be pretty lively. And I think all of us want to do what's best for our community because most of us are going to be here for a long time. Enough on that? Okay. I know we're going to have questions at the end.
At the end,
We have a couple more topics.
because we want to blend the budget into this conversation. While we're waiting on that, we sent out letters about a week ago with names and addresses that didn't match, but just to see if people would notice. Got a lot of comments back, and so I want to hit the big picture with you and then also address some of the comments that we have received as a board so you can kind of see the big picture.
That would be the big picture. It's showing up on my screen. It's a very big picture. Technology is one of our cornerstones.
It's changing.
How's that working for you?
It's evolving.
Little Jeopardy here.
Just walk over. Well, come on. It shows up on the computer, just not up on the screen.
Yeah, Patrick seems to have the magic
As soon as he
touch.
walks
Just
over,
walking
it
over, it
jumps
just
up.
clicks right up.
Move.
Oh, see? Thank you, Patrick.
This should say budget 2020 up there, so I apologize. That's actually my typo. What I want to do is what we've got up here is we've got actual 2018, projected 2019, and budget 2020. And in putting together a budget, we have to make it balance out. So what we've got here is 18 had revenues of 6 million, 6 million, 6.4 million this year. And I'm actually going to kind of work my way up a little. We got transfer to reserve funds. What reserve funds are is we have replacement reserves. So replacement reserves are like this building, lakeside pool, parks, all those type of things where we've got assets that are in place and we got to fix them up and continue to do it. We have an engineering study done every 3 years. We rebalance and everything, all the amounts we need, anticipating inflation and all that type of stuff. So that's there. And then the other thing we have going into there is the working capital reserves, which can fund the projects like we just talked about. So we have an increase in expenses going from 4.5 million to 4.9 million. I'm going to show you a slide next. That expense increase is about 335,000 from the athletic fields. So, and I'm going to walk you through the big picture of that in a minute. We've got the Civic Corridor, I'll talk about as a whole. It's been put in place over a course of years, and a lot of lessons have been learned, which we're going to apply going forward because we're wiser today. The good news is the transfer to reserve funds went up. This is actually bad news, but it went up about 100,000 because of the reserve study. We just need, as we are putting more and more assets in place, we need more money to support those assets, just part of evolving. Gross revenues, we've put an assessment increase of 2.7% in, and then we have also got Island Village revenues, which are starting to help and stuff like that. So we've got balancing there with it as we've done there. And can we flip to the next page? So let's talk about the Civic Corridor, which is a real driver. The Civic Corridor has the access road. That access road starts at about the CCD building, if you all know where that's at, and goes all the way to the back. 375,000. We got the dog park, 807,000. These are the actual costs that we paid for these things. Golf course property, nothing is developed there, but we had an opportunity to get it a couple years ago, and that was 615,000. And the athletic complex, which is the fields, the pavilion, the building with the bathrooms and all that type of stuff, is 4.6 million. So when you look at our $6.4 million is on the Civic Corridor. So I mean, it's real money. It's an asset. Certainly, I honestly believe that it helps our home values and everything like that, because we have stuff in this community that a lot of communities don't have. What I don't think was properly considered and thought through when these decisions were being made was there's a lot of maintenance to maintain these things. So, for example, the dog park has a budget of $63,000 of expenses to maintain it. We have estimated revenues from the athletic complex of $77,000. We have expenses of $351,000. And people have said, Brian, what the heck are the expenses? Well, if you take the athletic complex, reserves are $84,000. And that just means you've got to be replacing stuff. You got all this new equipment out there, so you have to fund it over time. Staffing 112, that's one full-time person and some part-time people, because we've got to have some opening, shutting it, maintaining it, security, and everything like that. We're doing all questions at the end. Landscaping, $78,000. Supplies, $25,000, with all the different things going on out there. Electric, $25,000. Insurance, $6,000. If you take the dog park, we got reserves of $29,000. We've got landscaping of $23,000. Supplies of $7,000. So you end up with a lot of expenses that are part of running it. We have, Vanessa will talk about the charter review here, but we've actually put something in the charter review for recommended language that says in the future, whenever CROA is going to do something greater than $250,000, the board presentation should include not only what the heck is the thing going to cost, but what's it going to cost to maintain it on a run rate basis. You know, this is an annual run rate expense, this $414,000 a year. It just happens year after year, and it will go up in inflation, and it is the cost of having an asset. I'm going to talk about some of the stuff tying into what they did in a minute or two and kind of why that's important. But this gives you, so when you saw the expenses going up by $400,000, we already had the dog park before. You get a little bit of inflation, but you know, when you look at the $351,000 there, of the $400,000 increase, $350 came from there, and the other $50 is other stuff. So that's really the driver of that. And if we go to the next slide, let me talk about Island Village a little. Everybody knows Island Village is being built at the end down there. And I've worked with David. David, whom there, is actually the guy who's in charge of all of Central Florida, 10 communities that Mattamy Homes has, and they're coordinating the whole building development out there. They're going to start, they've been working for about a year, year and a half on getting everything organized with the road going out, the bridge and stuff like that. They're actually going to start recording plats. And when they do that, they own a plat, in January of 2020. And they're going to record more plats in March and more towards the end of the year. We've thrown in a little conservatism to here, but when they pull a plat, they actually owe us an association fee. So Island Village is going to start cranking out revenues to us. If you, David and I went back a little, but this is like the annual dues, and this becomes repetitive. So there's 979 homes, and assuming this timeline worked, by the time you get out to 2026, we've got more than $1 million worth of revenue that's coming in a year. So when we talked about earlier on that slide about $6 million of revenue, it would then go up to like $7 million of revenue. Our homes would go from the 4,321 we've mentioned up to about 5,200. So Island Village is becoming part of the real community. Working capital here is a plan on when those homes could sell. They record the plat, they're going to start building, they're going to start selling, and that activity is going to go on over a period of time. I'll let you speak.
Sorry. Since I know you're recording. And again, my name's David Hume, and I'm with Mattamy Homes, and also I'm here as a resident, so I'm wearing two hats tonight. But I just want to give everybody I'll call it the standard disclaimer, which is we're trying to help out CROA and the community for budgeting purposes by giving them some projections. They are just projections at this time. Since we haven't even completed the road to Island Village, there's a lot of uncertainty that's baked into this, so it's our best guess, but don't take this to the bank, literally or figuratively. Who knows what could transpire in the upcoming months or years. This is a good place to start, but again, I just want to give the standard disclaimer that things could change, as all developments do.
And I assumed that meant they would build them faster and sell them faster. And in all honesty, I was going to say that because David and I have went back and forth, and he's been very gracious in helping. This year, I wanted to do a plan through 2026, and I think multi-year planning, A, is good. I think this is great because it at least allows us to see a picture. I think for CROA, if you've got $7.5–8 million worth of revenue and a few $1 million of assets to support working capital projects, I think you ought to have a multi-year plan because I think it's dangerous to not think through the impacts of that 351 rolling through every year and stuff like that. So we've really tried to do a snapshot. You heard earlier where David had said that, normally we get about $700,000 coming through for working capital for the part of Celebration that's developed today, and we plan on 300 home sales a year. We've been averaging more than that. Most years, if you have a recession, you have less. I mean, and that's probably David's biggest risk when he thinks about Island Village too, is if there's a recession in there, then this whole thing gets skewed. We shouldn't spend this money without understanding risk factors. But if you added 700 to that, you could have for a period of time here $800, $900, $1 million coming through in working capital. So that builds up to that 6 or 7 million that David talked about. Working capital also can get used for other smaller expenditures too, so it's not all big items. But what I really want to talk about here, because I don't want to go to the next one yet, is, when you looked at the priorities, you saw a parking garage, and you say, well, where would you do a parking garage? Or you saw a community center, or you saw a performing arts center. So I'm going to be very specific with you about things that we're thinking about right now. Performing arts center, we have talked with Lexan about the AMC Theater. We have not got into details, but we certainly have had that conversation. Lexan certainly has interest. If you talk about the theater, could it be, would you buy it? No, you wouldn't buy it. I think, Lexan's never specifically told me this, but I think all those buildings are leveraged out through debt financing. So I think you'd be doing a 10, 15, 20-year lease, but it's an option. If you talk about a community center, one of the things that we've been having very serious conversations about is the Stetson building. Stetson building has been for sale for a long time. Originally they wanted Fort Knox. Price keeps going down. There are a couple people right now, I think, who are looking at it, but if they don't come to fruition, we have a good relationship with Stetson through the Celebration Foundation, which has been working with them. And if we can get Stetson at a fair price, we're seriously thinking about it. And the reason we're seriously thinking about it is that Civic Corridor page, we've shown you that we can build very expensive things when we build them from new. The advantage maybe of having Stetson is you could move Town Hall to Stetson. Maybe then you rent out part of it to Celebration Foundation or something like that. You convert this building to a community center, and you solve the community center problem. You then could make this much more functional space, and you buy yourself time. Because if you build a community center from day one trying to solve every one of your problems, we're hearing numbers like 6, 8, 10, $11 million. If you did the conversion the way I just described it, you could literally convert this building into a very functional building, and you leave yourself lots of opportunity in the future to add a second building or to build out the back a little or something like that as you have funding. So there's value in flexibility, and that's what we're thinking about. And if you talk about parking, there's really only one place that I can think of for parking, because you don't solve parking on the street. You solve parking with a parking garage. And if you had the space between Stetson and the Marriott Hotel or the Bohemian, you could possibly build a garage there or have CC do it or something. We have brainstormed all these. And we're saying these things out loud so everybody can yell at on the back porch and the front porch and have fun. But this is where you kind of start going with this, and this is where we're going. If we ended up doing a quick project on Stetson, we would have to issue debt. If we issued debt, what would happen is we would literally have to go to you, the voters, and we'd have to vote a referendum. And let's say we did $2 million of debt to complete a deal. The run rate on, just to be perfectly frank here, and I did these in a budget meeting that's actually online a couple weeks ago. If we bought that, when you talk about the debt financing, when you talk about the reserves, when you talk about Stetson's cost for that place would be $500,000 a year. So you end up, when you do something like that, having to take working capital funds and convert them to operating funds. One of the questions that was happened is there used to be more money going into working capital because we also put in, there was a mortgage on this building. That mortgage was $310,000. We actually made a decision a year ago to cut that down to 160, and this year we cut it to zero. Because what we said is the more assets that we put into production that have to be supported, the more we need those working capital funds. I think if we were going to, and the other board members can talk later, but I think if we went to a scenario where we bought a Stetson and started doing some of the stuff I talked about, working capital funds wouldn't go into working capital, they'd start going into operating funds to support it. But what we need you to understand is when people are going to see the Parks and Facilities Plan, but we also wanted to hear the budget part of this, because the reality of the matter is they both have to be thought about as part of the process. And could I go to the last slide? And I don't want you leaving here saying, do we have any cash? Actually, we've got strong cash. We've got operating cash at September 30th of $1,345,000. We've got replacement reserves of $1,145,000, which is more than the engineer anticipates, so we're strong on that one, and those are protected assets. Once they're in there, they can be used for nothing else. We have working capital fund of $321 at September 30th, and the contingency fund is really an emergency fund, and we've got $478,000 there. So we're in a good position cash-wise, quite strong. And it's a question of, as we think about the working capital fund and as it will evolve and develop over the next 5 or 6 years and different opportunities that may evolve, how do we financially structure these things and how do we structure them to meet the community needs that have been brought forward to us? So those are the issues we're really thinking about. And with that, I'll let Vanessa talk about the charter review project and what's happening there.
Thank you, Brian. I actually, this is my second time on the board. And I have to give kudos because the budget process and the details that have been gone through is wonderful. Having an accountant, somebody who really knows the money on the board is absolutely fantastic. So thank you. I do. The treasurer.
I've always said I'm the Atari version of Brian's Windows 10 budget.
So thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to, I know that there's some task force members out here. This is for the charter review. The last time this was done was 10 years ago, and this is when it was actually converted over from the builder and the voting blocks and all of that over into actually residents voting for resident issues. So a couple of task force members, I see Leslie out there. Gary was out here a minute ago. Thank you. So Gary was here, who is our chairman. Anybody else am I missing? Okay. So, and hopefully they're watching online. And then the liaisons for the Charter Review Task Force are Brian, Jackson, and myself. And I have to give kudos. This has been going on since our very first meeting for the Charter Review has been May 14th. That's a long time. And we're still meeting at least, I think we started off 3 times a month. Now we're meeting every week. There have been a couple of times, if I remember correctly, I believe Greg's wife's in the, out there, and she could attest to the fact that sometimes I think it's been twice a week for a couple of the meetings. So thank you for your painstakingly dedicated initiative, because when we always make sure we have a task force member there, or a board member there, and sometimes we're like, okay, I've already been to 3 meetings this week, I don't want to go anymore. But we show up, and thank you very much. So here's a couple of highlights. First of all, again, it's been going on since May. Our goal to have the vote, because ultimately any change at all to the task or to the charter has to be done through the membership, which would be you. So you will actually get the yay or nay on I like these changes or I don't like these changes. Our hope is to make sure that it goes, well, first of all, our plan is to make sure that our voting for the charter review and voting for all of the amendment changes will go out at the same time as our elections to save on postage. It'll all go out together. Thank you. Since he's arrived. Hello, Gary. So Gary is our chairman. So the goal is to have it go out together. We typically get about 1,000 members that vote for the election. We would like to intensify that. Hopefully we will get a little extra passion because there's things that are on the charter that they would like changed too. And we'll actually get more votes than we normally would for an election. If we don't, we at least know we will have enough to be able to either get an affirmation, right? We have majority, 51% of the votes agree with the changes, or they don't. So either way. We are trying really hard as a task force, and I will give kudos to them, because they're working really hard to make sure that they are changes that are truly desired in the community. They're all initiatives that have been brought out by you. I have a problem with X. I have a problem with Y. And they have been discussed deliberatively, both online, and at any moment in time, you can go online and see all of the town halls. There's actually been 2 town halls about 4 specific issues, including management contract. Help me out here, Gary. Board term limits, group homes, and how you bring up different issues and things like that you would like addressed for the board. Thank you, Gary. I know there's a reason why you're the chairman. So those are the big hot topics that were actually addressed in town hall. However, there were also side conversations during that. You can actually go online and see those. More importantly, all of our task force meetings are recorded, so you can go back if you wish and watch the 3 hours of video every night because we have just extended our meetings from 2 hours to 3 hours to make sure we get it through everything. So again, I go back to the whole, it is extremely laborious, but they have been deliberative to make sure that we have community involvement. If you go back through and you were looking online and you want to see something, please reach out ASAP, because our goal as a task force is to be complete with everything by November the 13th. They are currently already going through word by word. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Leslie. Word by word, they have already gone through chapters 1 through chapter 8 to see if there's any little things that need to be adjusted, like a verbiage, changing V to A. Going through all the administrative changes to try and clean things up that were missed the first time. Now they're going through on next Tuesday, next Tuesday, they're going through again the rest of the bylaws. And then the rest of the charter, and then they're going through the bylaws. They're doing the exact same thing. So again, November 13th, everything will be done. And then we'll be going through to TCC. So the attorney's been coming approximately every other week to make sure that we are on task and we're not trying to change anything that shouldn't be changed, or he is also advising throughout the process. We are expecting it to be pretty streamlined. The task force and the attorney have been working very well together to try and make sure that if there's an issue, how can we make it legally happen? Most importantly, we want to make sure that our language to protect the association, which is the reason why we have bylaws and charters, to protect the association and the members, is to make sure that we are in compliance with 720 laws. So we're adding verbiage to 720, which basically governs us, making sure that we are in line on the charter and the bylaws. A couple of highlights. Gary has been putting in, submitting things to communications, Friday Flash. Every Friday, there's a reminder in there. If you haven't looked at your magazine, your celebration magazine, it's in there every month. If you are really wanting to delve in a little deeper, there's board updates that have happened. There's 3 of them. Gary just handed in the 3rd one on Monday to the board that gives all of the details and all of the updates that have been handled up till now. So I highly encourage that if you want to be involved, it's still got a little bit of time, not much, be quick, but go online and actually do the best way to handle it. If you are just coming in now, you're just hearing it tonight, we're doing a charter review. Oh no, I didn't know that. Go into your board updates. Get into a situation where we just spent all this money, and we have no idea now how much it's going to cost to maintain it. So I think that's a very critical addition to it. And the other is adding a finance committee. Right now, we have an ARC committee, we have a covenants committee. They're both mandated within our charter. Adding a finance committee will add an extra layer to ensure when we don't have people like Brian on the board, we can actually have accountants, people that live and die numbers, future planning. That would be, I'm actually looking forward to that. I think the board really needs that extra end.
Brian's going to be the chair of that.
Yeah, welcome. Any other comments from?
What I would add is on the finance committee, it has become so clear to us over the last couple of years that with revenues, especially with Island Village coming on in the $7-8 million range and millions of dollars of assets, as we talked about, and growing, that the thing that is most important is to get financial accountability. So a finance committee, we would be looking actually at people in the community, 5 to 7, who are investment professionals or CPAs or stuff like that, who would be under the leadership of the board, but would actually come back and, just like there are ARC people and covenant people who are very good, and I know nothing about those, there are people like me who know finance, and you need those pockets of accountability to help boards go.
Jackson, any additions with regards to it? The board has worked really hard with the task force. We appreciate the fact that Gary and Kathy have worked really hard. Kathy's the co-chair. Worked really hard to make sure that the community is heard. So please make sure if there is something that you have, as you review things, if you do not see something on there that's important to you, please reach out ASAP so we can make sure it's on there. The mailings and more initiatives on how to get out the vote will be coming. Look out for your Celebration magazine and for your Friday Flash.
Thank you. Just go ahead and hold it. With that as background, we would be happy to take questions on any topic we have discussed tonight or any other topic. We just ask you please come up, state your name and address once, and you can ask as many questions as you want from anybody and everybody. Thank you. Come on up. But make the questions easy.
Judy Conk, 956 Paw Stand Road. My first question is, I heard somebody mention a full-time person for the field. Did I hear that correctly?
You did.
Is
Steve,
there a
would you
job
describe
description
the
for this
3
person?
people or what we have done out there?
Is there a job description for this person?
Yes, this person is the field complex coordinator, and they're managing bookings on site for the facility, ensuring that people are using the fields that they're supposed to, making sure that we don't have inappropriate activities taking place on the field, moving goals and lining the field. And they oversee the crew that's out there. And there are additional part-time park monitors that work out there that help with this and our support staff for that.
My question is, where does that person work out of?
Out of the complex.
Pardon me?
They're at the complex.
No, they're not. We were there today. There was no one there. Okay, just so you know.
What time were you there?
Pardon me?
What time were you there?
We were there at 10:30.
10:30 this morning?
Yes. And no one questioned the fact that we were walking on the fields, just so we know. Is the annual salary for that person and benefits listed somewhere publicly?
None of the individual salaries for any of the employees are listed within the budget, but they are within the GL line for the budget. So if you, I could walk you through it if you ever have any questions on it, but there are different GL categories for staffing.
Okay, and you mentioned also there would be part-time people?
Yes.
Okay, my concern with this whole thing is that we've been pretty active in coming to CROA meetings for the 4 years now that we've lived here. And I have never heard until recently the fact that it was going to cost over $300,000 to run this field that was originally not supposed to cost $4.6 million. I'm really concerned as a resident that this field which is beautiful. God knows it's gorgeous. I said to somebody today, I was on the Board of Trustees for Fairfield University. We have a Division I soccer team. We don't have the facilities at Fairfield that we now have here for 6-year-olds. And I know there's more than 6-year-olds using it, but that's the perception. Plus, I don't know what time it's being used because we were there during the day and nobody was on it. So that's just my question about it. In addition, the $77,000 in income seems way out of whack with the run ability. And my question is there any way we can raise the fees to at least offset some of these costs?
Can I take the first shot and then hand this to other board members too?
Say that, oh, it came as a shock to board.
No, let me take the first shot at your questions, and then I'll let other board members add to it. The answer to your question is yes. Several of us were, yeah, all of them. Several of us were surprised. The ball fields have evolved over a number of years. And I want to avoid being critical because somebody's going to sit on a board a few years from now and say, when Kinsella was a president, boy, did he screw that up. So the reality of the matter is we inherited a situation, and there was a price for the fields back then, but it involved girls going to the bathroom behind trees. So that just made 0 sense, so we had to roll it forward. Yes, we've got a beautiful field out there with the synthetic turf field and everything like that. We as a board made the decision that we had to have a full-time person residing out there, so they should be out there, and a couple of part-time people, because this thing is being used in the evenings, so I hope you see people in the evenings. It's being used in the weekends, and the last thing we wanted was a bunch of kids going out there and acting like teenagers. Now, I'm not even calling them hooligans. I'm just teenagers being teenagers and tearing the fields apart, and how much money could that cost us and stuff like that. So we said security mattered. All the other stuff that I talked about, like the $78,000 for groundskeeping and the 30-some thousand for watering and stuff like that, is realities that I don't think was thought about. It is a painful lesson learned, which is why you heard me earlier and Vanessa again talking about changing the charter to make it so that that actually gets put out there. The revenue perspective that we looked at is to kick this thing off. We have JR looking at a lot of stuff, Steve and others, to try to grow that. We agree there is definitely a need to grow that over time, and we want to. But from a budget perspective, we thought it would be myopic to just sit here and put the best foot forward. We're trying to put forth reality, and we understand it's a painful story in some ways.
And I recognize that this board has worked very hard to try to put it together.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Judy, if I could address the question of the revenue, because it's a legitimate one. I'm the liaison to the Recreation Committee, and the Recreation Committee has met, we've got some members of that committee here tonight. That committee has met hundreds and hundreds of hours over the last couple of years trying to figure out, what do you charge for these fields? Because they are pretty spectacular. And so they went out and they researched comparable facilities in Central Florida. They took a fairly broad range of fields and activities, and they looked at them and they said, well, what's the high, what's the low, what can we do? And at the end of the day, in the first year, the wisdom of that committee was, let's try and be about in the middle. Let's not overprice ourselves so that no one wants to use the fields. Let's not underprice them. And they set a target mark. The next part of the problem, I'll be very candid about because I'm the poster boy for soccer moms who hate, is that we insisted as a board that the participants and the people using this field had to pay for their use, that they weren't going to get a discount that was insane, even though they had been paying a certain amount when they were using the regular K-8 fields and other fields, that this was a significant upgrade. And we had that, I won't say fight, we had that discussion, we held it publicly, we brought all of those organizations in, we discussed, we negotiated, we occasionally yelled and screamed, and at the end of the day, we got every single organization to agree to the pricing structure that CROA and the Recreation Committee set. So, regardless of what you may hear, Celebration Youth Soccer pays the same as Celebration Soccer Stars and all of the other groups that are using it. Now, here's the good news. We don't know exactly what we're going to return because we've got tournaments and activities. But as we get a track record over the first 12 months, we are going to be able to adjust and figure out what we should be charging. And because we've already set the precedent that it is pay to play, which is very different, as you know, from just here's a percentage per participant, I think we've got a chance to start making that gap between the maintenance cost and the usage fees narrow down significantly. And I would say it's maybe not the number one priority of this board, but it's pretty high up there to get that gap shrunk.
We have received emails from others in the community who want us to look at every program. A program may only have $1,000 in revenue, but people have said, should they have $1,050? You know, to look across the board everywhere to just see, because every bit helps. Jackson used the word significantly. I wouldn't use that word, by the way. I'm not sure we're going to close. We're not going to close a $250,000, $275,000 gap significantly, but it would be nice to close it some. And we've been asked as a board, as we go through all these programs in the future and renew structures, to really look at it, because it's people's dollars in here, and it affects. You know, we've built some wonderful youth fields here, mostly youth, let's be honest, you know, and that's where people are coming back talking about community centers, performing arts, and other stuff like that we're thinking about.
Are we keeping track of the percentage of time that the fields are being used?
We have a automation system for all of our facility bookings, so we know total hours available versus total hours booked.
Will that be available to the public?
That's a great question. One of the things that Jackson's the liaison, its initiative through UCF, they're doing a sustainability study and looking at key performance indicators and metrics for that to determine success. And that's one of them that we're looking at, is amount, not just those fields, but across the board, amount of capacity versus amount actually being used.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the percentage of time that my $4,600,000.
I do want to take your comment really quick and just share with the board, if we could encourage management to put that maybe in the board packet for the first 12 months while we're reviewing it, so we can see monthly where things are going. That would be an excellent path to success.
Can I just make a quick comment too? And this is, you mentioned youth fields, Brian, and I think it's important to recognize that youth is the primary user. The one area that we were sorely lacking in, I believe, was the parents of the kids who did not have any real place to go play. We now have an adult soccer league that we've never been able to do before. So we are able to expand a little bit more than what we were able to before. And they do pay to play, and I was not one of those. So.
And we had, and just one further item on here, I had told Steve and Susan Kearns that we would have reporting on the Civic Corridor starting in 2020, you know, how much revenue, how much expense, and all of that. I think we just add the point that you asked about and Kevin was talking about here to further it, because it's a significant asset, it's a lot of money. The public is very much entitled to understanding cost benefit, and we'll learn for the future, because there's going to be the next project.
Yeah, and I'm fearful that the next project is going to involve the arts, and now all these rules will be in place and we won't be able to get it through, but that's another story. Is there an estimate on the percent of increase based on your proposed budget that we, the taxpayers, will pay in our dues?
2.7%.
Okay. And on the charter, will we be able to vote on individual charter items or a charter package?
It's going to be a little bit of both. We're actually sectioning it off. For instance, we have some that we legally need to change to make sure that we're 720 compliant. We are going to section that. And they're in the conversation right now as to the exact details, but there have been some conversations about actually pulling out a couple of the more hot topics and just making them up and down. The task force does not want to have a poison pill in this.
Does not want to
have a poison pill in this. We want to make sure as a task force that everything that's going through is something that truly is for the good of the community and not political. So that is, I want to make sure that that's highlighted. This is not supposed to be a political process. It's supposed to be what's best for us as Celebration.
I want to thank you for entertaining all my questions. I've been writing them down. Just the last comment. The mecca would be to have our theater back for a combined arts center, both an art gallery and performance space. If that doesn't happen because we're dealing with an entity who may or may not agree with that, and we're looking at other options, would the board please consider the combining of the idea of a civic center and a performance center so that it is used continually? The arts are so rich in this community and so displaced in this community. I look forward to the day when I can say, hey, thanks, guys.
I look forward to that too. Before I'm an assistant.
My name is Rand Saylor, 1401 Celebration Avenue. I'm just going to add the last point you made, doubling up, full utilization, absolutely leveraging everything we spend is so crucial because it gets us further on everything. That wasn't the point I was going to start with. First, I'm on the Artisan Park Committee and I'm on a condo board. I do approximately 1/20th the work these people do, and it is unbelievable to watch the board in the last 2 years. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the thoughts and the time. The second thing I'd like to, you know me, there'll be a question that'll come after many comments. The emphasis, whether it is in the charter or whether it is in procedure, ongoing operating and replacement cost is unbelievably important. I think you guys get that. I'm just reiterating, don't buy a pig in a poke. So I'm really, really glad you're focused on that. Now to the question, small lead-in. Surveys years ago, surveys now. We did a survey a year and a half ago at Artisan Park. I'm not telling you anything you don't know when I say that surveys of this kind are very self-selected. People who are interested show up. It's the wonder and the danger of pluralistic politics that the interested parties speak. Having said that, first I would ask, and I would ask of you, and then I will ask you the question. I think it is very important, and particularly with the skills and the intensity that's on this board now, that the fact that X people said, I want this or that, should absolutely not be dispositive of where we go. You guys are running a town. You guys are running, as Brian's talking about the numbers, the complexity, it grows every year. And it is so important to remember that you don't represent, well, in my mind, you represent the town and the wellness of the town. You don't represent the fact that a number of people who voted for you said, I'm voting for you because you'll give me pickleball, or you'll give me an arts center, or you'll give me anything. It's so important that the judgment of this board be used, you guys have focused correctly on transparency. You focused on openness. You focused on community input. That being said, the buck, and we've talked about the bucks tonight, the bucks stop with you guys. So I would just urge the board, and I don't know if you have conversations about this or the way you approach things, but I would ask how much, and I don't want to put individuals this isn't a question and answer for individual directors, but I'd be interested if the board thinks above and beyond the numbers they receive and goes to whether it is costs or whether, for example, parking garage, incredibly expensive. But if you can do the projections and say where the dollars come from and what it earns us, do you guys go beyond the desires and say, that's nice, it's not going to fly?
I'll go first, and then I'll let some other board members speak. We spoke about Stetson tonight. I've spoken about Stetson a few times. Stetson is a topic. Certain people in this town will tell me and have told me it would be the stupidest thing we ever did, and certain people have told me it would be a brilliant idea. But it's outside of the box thinking when you start talking about converting this building, and you talk about if you had Stetson, and then maybe you have a parking solution, and maybe you buy yourself the benefit of time. We are willing as a group to listen to many different ideas. We're going to what Judy was talking about. I think building new, I really hope to God we don't build a new community center. And because I think if we did, it's going to be $8 million, and it's going to be, what the heck did we just do to ourselves? For example, we had a meeting, and out the back, where you go out this back door here, there's 4,000 square feet. You could actually have 2 floors, have 8,000 square feet, and do something completely different right there on the space without going into the parking lot at all, and stuff like that. So at this point in time, there are very smart people in this town, lots of people who have good ideas, and will drop them. We're looking for anything, because I showed you the numbers before, so we got a really good idea what the numbers are. We could raise a little bit of debt, but when you start talking about the operating costs and stuff like that, it all factors in. So we're looking very hard at what you're talking about, and we're willing to look at things that would be totally new ideas if we can do them in concert with other entities or stuff like that to make it work.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that this board is uniquely positioned. We didn't come with an agenda to do any one particular thing. We came with an agenda to bring this town into its second 25th year. And because of that, we've been pretty open to hearing what people want, because we want to be aware of that, but not driven. We're not having popular votes on anything. Having said all that, we also know that there are, as Brian said, an extraordinary number of talented people. You're very fortunate to serve on 2 committees that have a lot of talented people.
Fortunate?
We can discuss that later. But I think when you look around the community, you have people with all of these skills and abilities and insights and thoughts about what should happen. And it is really fascinating from my perspective as a board member to hear from people about what their vision is and what their view is. I made a video notoriously a year ago talking about what the vision for Celebration might be going forward. I got a huge amount of reaction to that, even though I didn't say anything specific. I just said, these are things we ought to be thinking about. And the foundation came out and did a 25th year planning piece, not because of my video, but because it was the 25th year. And I think we are at the point in the development of this community, as we go from being a new shiny object to our 20th and 25th, we are developing, we're in a different phase. And this is the time for us to start thinking expansively, not about doing more stuff, but what's the right thing to do? What do we need to be doing? And that's why, at least for me, I'm on the board. It's not because I have an agenda to get a playground at Artisan Park or anything else. It's really to think about the legacy we leave to this community, to the place that we're all pretty committed to. And so I just want to thank everybody that comes to these meetings, that watches these meetings, that emails us even when they call me stupid, that joins in the conversation, that productively attempts to move us forward as a community. It's okay to disagree, and it's okay to think we're right or wrong about things. We're just trying to get us moving forward, and that comes when we all agree that we're better as a community than we are as individuals.
And one other thing is, when this board, when we took our seats almost 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years in March, one thing that we wanted to do was, most of us, some of us just been here a year, sorry. But one of the things we wanted to do was avoid making huge decisions on the squeaky wheel gets the grease, when you got a group of people come in that are very vocal. They may be a vocal group, but they're not necessarily the vocal majority. So we'd get people coming. I saw it when I would sit in board meetings before I got on the board. I would see that happen all the time, where you get a vocal group come in here, and the board make a decision based on that group because nobody showed up. So we went to this. We paid Lowe's Design. We paid them a fee to do this statistically valid survey several different ways that they came up with all these statistics for us. So we went that route in order to try to avoid that and basing our decisions on more accurate information from the town.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to comment on is the squeaky wheel. I think what at least last year's board and this year's board is trying to do more of engaged planning. We want the community involved, but we want to be planful about it. We didn't want to do knee-jerk reactions. We want to listen to the surveys, but we're not going to necessarily follow it in that order, but it's input for us to think about things. I mean, we've made some controversial decisions that are contrary to what the community wanted, and we all think, I think the board pretty unanimously thinks we're better off for what we're doing. And we hear that from the community, doing some things that we think are good for the community, good for our reputation, good for our property values, good for the long term. And that, I think that's what we want to do. I think the survey and some of the questions we have in here, and we see the differences from residents. You know, I want more now or I want to wait. You know, 50-50. Okay, well, this is helpful. So we don't want to, we don't have 90% saying, let's wait and save up the money for the big thing and do nothing now. That's not what we're saying. So we'll balance all that and continue to seek input. Engaged planning, I think, is what we want and what we're trying to do. But thank you for your comments.
And I think one thing that has to be remembered is Island Village. We can argue whether Island Village is going to take 5 years or 7 or 8, but if you have 1,300 residents, and let's say there's an average of 3 people a residence, that's another 4,000 people coming down who are going to need access to a community center, who will want to be using the athletic fields and stuff like that. You know, when we talk about a performing arts center, who would want to use it, or coming downtown to restaurants? So there are pieces of growth coming to this community that we need to really be planning about, because they're going to be real impacts.
Thank you.
To your original point, I think with this board, when it comes to the 4 of us that came on board here, we were handed something that really never happened before to any board before that. And in the 11th hour, the prior board ended up voting for something that was a large project. A great project in the community, but something that was a challenge handed to us right as we walk in. When we do things in celebration, we like to do them right, and we're proud of that. And so that's why we stepped in and we said we're going to put the restrooms in, and when we open this facility, it's going to be that world-class facility that we're very proud of. Now, in that same situation, we've learned a lot. We've learned that a board does change over every year. And so whatever that original image or passion that one board had to get this field project started does change hands. And by the time you're in that 11th hour, it's handed to entirely a new group of people. What our path and vision is with each project that we do, whether it's one that's over $250,000 or if it's a $10,000 small little, I don't know, monkey bars. It's going to be something that we have a plan for, and we look at the run rate entirely. Because you don't go ahead and buy a house that you can't afford because you had the down payment. And unfortunately, not everybody looks at it that way.
I have seen that. I'm very happy with it. I'm probably already preaching to the choir, but I just wanted the judgment that I've seen from the individuals on this board is more important than saying that 52% want X, and it's clear you guys have the guts to do it, and I applaud it, and I'm very glad you guys are doing it.
Just quickly in response to that too, the one thing, because I was on the board 2 years ago, and so this is my third mix of people. The one thing that's important to recognize from the 2015 to now is the board's responsibility is also to look at trends. As ball fields, as those things all completed, right? The things that were lower just shifted up. So I think that actually reinforces a little bit the validity of the vocal desires within the community. The community center was on the list the first time. It was just a little lower. So again, the vocal ones are starting to just shift. But I think it's important because it does lend to validity of desires within the community. That does not mean just because you want it, does not necessarily mean you get it, because you have to plan for it. But it is the board's responsibility, I believe, and I think everybody here would, that it's our responsibility to be financially responsible with the desires in the community. If the community center or whatever is important, you put that on there. How do you pay for it? And that's the number one thing I don't think any past board has really considered. They've considered the initial investment, but has not considered the long-term ramifications of our decisions. And that's the one thing that I think distinguishes where we're at now versus where we have been in the past. And that's the one thing I love. Like I said, this is the third time I've had the third mix of board members, and I have to give kudos. This is really, it's been a lot of fun. As much as we have our challenges in our inner dialogue, I think we work well together, because if somebody has a thought or a discussion about something, we bounce, well, I hear what you're saying, but what about this? And the email exchanges that go on behind the scenes that the public doesn't see, which can see, they're totally public knowledge. But it's important to recognize that it's dialogue about, okay, yeah, we want to do this, but we can't do that yet. How can we plan? Stetson has been a big one, because that's something very real. Parking is very real. These are all issues that are in our minds now, desires within the community. How do we make them happen and still be financially responsible about it?
You just said, and not to surprise in many fewer words, that I did exactly what I was getting at. Thank you.
Others who would like to ask questions, please come on up.
Hello, I'm Tanya Filak, 1105 Tapestry Drive. It's not on?
Step up one more.
Okay. Hello there. I am also on the Artisan Park Committee, just for transparency. But I'm speaking today as a resident. And I wrote this whole long thing so I wouldn't forget anything. First off, I want to express my thanks to the CROA board and its committee members. Can you hear me now? There? Okay. All right. First off, I want to express my thanks to the CROA board and its committees for the efforts to date to gather community input and for long-term community parks and recreation plan. My husband and I both participated in your sessions earlier this year, soliciting input, and have spoken frequently with many of you regarding the plan. We are happy to see that this is finally coming to fruition. In the original design for a celebration, Artisan Park was planned to have a playground for our children and other activities, areas for adults. Other efforts took priority over the years, and it was never built. It's time for the Artisan community to have these kinds of amenities just like the other celebration villages. It would be amazing to have a local playground that residents could actually walk to instead of driving to before school, after school, and get some physical activity for our kids and for adults and our senior populations as well. To have a physical activity area to service the roughly 1/3 of all the celebration, which is on the southern section of town, where the closest community park to us is Spring Lake. The open field across from the Artisan Clubhouse, right on Celebration Avenue, is grossly underutilized for its location and size, providing us a great opportunity to expand CROA's recreational amenities. Play allows children to use their creativity while developing their imagination, dexterity, physical, cognitive, and emotional strength. Play is important to healthy brain development. It's through play that children at a very early age engage and interact in the world around them. Perhaps above all, a playground is just simply joy that is cherished part of childhood. For our adults and seniors, there aren't many areas outside of the courts downtown by Lakeside for adult recreation, which is just as important for a healthy lifestyle as playgrounds are for children. I love how we're trying to combine the playground with also possibly croquet and bocce ball courts. I think it's a great combination. I think the land in that area would be greatly used for it. This is also important as we all look to continue to improve our community to maintain property values and the positive image of what Celebration is to all of us, that we invest in play areas for all our residents. I'm here as a voice for the families that could not attend tonight. I know we were talking about soccer usage. Most families are on the soccer fields because there are games going on tonight. There's also a bands event from the CK8, so not a lot of families here to vocalize. But as I had said, it's hard for families to come to meetings and have their voices heard because of work, after-school activities, and schedules. Due to this, we put together a petition through change.org through Facebook, which has been signed by 230 Celebration residents as of today at 12:45 in favor for a recreational area over by Artisan. The petition has been forwarded to the CROA board. I'm sure you guys have all seen it. Now that the master plan is finally is being finalized, I'm here to ask for the consideration that this recreation area for Artisan be on one of CROA's top priority lists. The overall cost versus the impact to the community is likely to bring the highest return on investment for all of the projects which have been discussed as the top projects for CROA. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. One of the things, I'm an Artisan Park resident. I'm married to an Artisan Park committee member. I'm required by the charter to sit on the Artisan Park committee as an ex officio member, which is hopefully going to change through the charter revision process, but I'm still there. I just want to say to those of you in the audience, but also to those of you who are watching, we have not made any decisions, as you've heard tonight, about any of these things. We recognize the importance of a playground in Artisan Park. There is I'll just call it what it is, there is an unfounded rumor that we want to place the park in the amphitheater in Artisan. We've not had any conversation about that. That's not occurred at all. As you heard Tanya say, there is consideration of CROA taking the field across from the clubhouse and converting that into a CROA amenity. We're a long way away from knowing if that can happen. We've gotten some legal opinions that give us a route to get there if that's what we decide to do. We will have those conversations through the Recreation Committee, through the CROA board, with the residents in Artisan Park specifically, and with all of the residents in Celebration, I'm sure, as we move forward. I very much appreciate that Tanya and Greg and others have put together the petition so that we know that there's interest, because we do know that an underrepresented group in this community is typically families. We don't hear from them all that often, certainly on a night like tonight when there's a lot of things going on. In fact, Vaughn had to leave for one of those concerts, or he's very young. I can't remember which. In any event, this is important stuff, and we're going to take it seriously, and we're going to look at all of these options. And I know that people may say, well, what about, and then fill in the blank of their particular project. We care about all of those. That's why we did the survey. It's why we went to an outside group. It's why we've got this very large report that will be released to you soon. We wanted to do this the right way. And I think by doing it the right way, it means that the decisions that we will make over the next year about amenities will be decisions that we can all live with, and that we may not all agree with, but we'll understand how we got there and why we did it. And so I ask for your trust and patience that we're going to do this in the proper way, with the proper safeguards, and with the best interests of the entire community.
Other questions? Please, anybody, any subject, come on up. You gotta come up, sorry. They want to see your smiling face on TV.
I have a question.
David, I'm sorry, David.
Does this need to come up here? What would you like my name?
Sure.
My name is Jerry Losey. My address, I live in the Spring Park Townhomes. Okay. In terms of the foundation, maybe as a source of revenue, I don't know anything about what their charter, or whatever you might want to call it, lays out in terms of what their mission is. But I would think that that would be a potential source of income for community type stuff. I came from the field of development, and you know, you can raise millions and millions of dollars, including from especially like planned gifts, which would be like people leaving estate gifts, you know, wills, etc. It would be interesting to know how much, say, over X number of years the foundation has actually raised for something like that, or what their vision is. This is not a criticism of the foundation. But it could be a source for untold sums of money. But I would not want, as much as I say that, I would never want to spend money until that stuff is in the bank. You know, I would say, well, we're going to spend this because we're confident we'll eventually raise a lot of money. You know, I would like have the money first. But I would think that would be a big source. But also, just again, ask them maybe about their mission. Do community improvements come into play? And then actually ask them. I'm sure they're wonderful. I'm not criticizing them in any way. But ask them. It would just be interesting to find out how much have they given or raised. And it's all of us, so I'm not criticizing them. How much have they actually put toward community, this community, not just, you know, because they do a lot of work. I understand they do a lot of work for outside the community, and that's great. I would want to affirm them for that as well. But just to find out how much have they been able to put towards the community. Maybe they don't have a vision yet for the possibilities here. And I just thought I would bring that up.
Okay, I'll go first. My wife, Sandy back there, was actually an executive officer for the Celebration Foundation. I was an advisory board member for the Celebration Foundation. I certainly talk to people out there who are on the foundation, so I'm very familiar, as I'm sure some others are too. You were on the board too. If you talk about Stetson as one example, actually the relationship with Stetson is not ours. It is through the foundation. So they approached us and were very proactive, and we're very thankful for that. We have had conversations with the foundation as we've talked about the Stetson building. I'm going to use that as an example. We've said that anything that happens will be public because we're CROA and the whole thing's going to be public. How much money they would want to commit is ultimately going to be their decisions. It's their financials. We will have to make a decision based upon what we think is right. On the other hand, Gloria Nick, who was the retiring executive director for the foundation, has talked about how there is the possibility to raise money from other people who have had familiarity with this community in the past, Disney people and stuff like that. There are lots of different options that can choose to go. I think that's one more thing that the board has to have in its conversation. If something gets really hot from a time frame standpoint, then we're going to have very hot time frame conversations. Otherwise, I think we're going to have to workshop things. Be a transition to a new board, unless all four of us get reelected. And so that is there. I think your question is very fair, and it's one that we'll explore a lot and we have talked about.
No, I was going to recommend to definitely go online to the Celebration Foundation's website. This is not, while we have a great working relationship with the foundation, we are not the foundation. They are an asset in our community, and they are an asset in Osceola County as a whole. So definitely go online, check out the website, see everything that they do. You'll be impressed with how many other things that they don't necessarily push credit for. I mean, these screens right here are owned by the foundation. So there's some great opportunities and great relationships we have.
So I have not served on their board, but I know that part of the foundation's mission is outside of our borders, and part of their mission is inside. They do concert series. They have sponsored some other individual concerts. They are sponsoring with CROA, Lifelong Learning. They do Thriving in Praise. Those are all for celebration. So, what's that? Feed children. So there's lots of issues that the foundation does. Wings, yeah. Right. So there's a lot of things that foundation does. Your question about estate planning, I mean, that's a question to direct to them in terms of the philanthropy that they have had. I also know that 3 months ago, they started a grants committee, so looking for outside, fairly larger sources of funding for various initiatives. And there's a lot of collaboration with CROA, so it's a marvelous.
And we are just talking to them. We are actively talking with
Yeah,
them.
we're actually, and on the Stetson piece, we've been talking with them for two years.
3 years, because I
3
was
years.
on it 3 years ago.
Yeah, so it's a good relationship, and certainly, I mean, I think your background with development, you may want to talk with them about some of your ideas too. So thank you for raising that.
I was just going to add, it's a great comment because not everybody is aware of that relationship, and that's a question that a lot of people do have and aren't entirely aware, mostly because the foundation doesn't take credit for everything. So thank you for bringing it up. It allows us to go ahead and share that information with the rest of the community as well. No, not at all. I'm not. Not at all. Thank you.
We're going to call it the Losi Community Center on behalf of the generous gift.
You want to go to Stetson, that's great. Can we make money from that, renting all those offices out to people?
The question was, if we were to purchase Stetson or get into a relationship with that Stetson building, could we actually, and I believe you're essentially asking, can we make money or is it going to cover its expense? And that is what we are reviewing. We're not jumping the gun on any of this information. We're reviewing all possible options.
It could, I would be hesitant to ever say it would cover all its costs, but it would certainly defer certain costs, and it would free up this building to be something else entirely. And I do always want to remind you that we are Celebration. We can spend $6 million by building a $3 million building, and we've proven it. So if, to me, if we could pull off Stetson and convert this and buy ourselves a decade to continue to enhance this and other strategies as they go forward, it would be wonderful. That is the reason why we keep using that word. There are pros and cons. Yes, we've all heard them in spades, but flexibility with real estate is a wonderful thing.
I think even just to continue a little bit with that, our goal should be, if we do something, how many things can we check off our list, right? If we did the Stetson building, we just checked off a whole pile of things on that want list. We also need to make sure we're doing our due diligence. So, and again, it goes back to the cost benefit, right? So if we spend, first of all, my conversations when I was on last time was with the Celebration Foundation, and I was in the CROA as an advisor on behalf of CROA. The cost for the Stetson building was not where it is now. So at all, like they were asking $8+ million, and they're not now. So waiting benefits sometimes if you can wait it out. But I think it's important. That's an iconic building. That is a beautiful building. If we as a community can invest on troubled properties that are a benefit to our community and our property values, those also add to our decision, right? If we know that having the Stetson building vacant is going to decrease our property values, I think that's something that weighs into a due diligence of our board. So I think it's important that you understand as residents that we are looking at the whole picture. And if we can check off as many boxes in our decisions as possible, and make sure that our residents are being served the way they deserve to be, because you're paying just like we are. If we're paying the assessments, we want to make sure we're getting our money worth. And Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's no accident that we keep using this word. If you like this idea or hate this idea, we've learned that some people are in the audience, everybody knows somebody, and a lot of people watch this thing on TV, scream one way or the other. If we had to react fast, we would have to come to the public for a vote for raise funds. I'm sure we'd have to have some debt financing. We could easily do that, but it would require a community vote. It has a lot of impacts. So we're trying extremely hard tonight with some of our previous board workshop conversations to get this out there front and center so people can say this is being thought about, because it impacts a lot of things. So that's what we're doing.
Next question.
Jerry Losi, South Village. I wasn't here earlier, and I don't know what's in that study, but when you did the survey, did you ask people in any way the questions about these priorities where you also stated something about how much it was going to cost? So for instance, the concept is, I hear this on TV all the time, where they talk about surveys, real professional surveys, where they, first they ask questions about something and people are all for it. And then they ask in a different way where they say, this is what it's going to cost you, and they're completely not for it. So it's radical. The results of surveys are just radically different depending on whether you talk about costs. Was there anything about the costs relating to the ball fields mentioned when you asked the cost the way they're known now?
No, the survey was not about the ball fields.
Oh,
This survey went out in April, May.
Oh, after the ball fields. Okay.
Yeah. So
So I'm just saying, keep the concept
Yeah,
in
right.
mind. Keep the concept in mind, because it's radically different. The results are radically different.
I think people would infer that a community center would cost more than a pickleball court.
Yeah.
Or a restroom.
But what I mean is, not like that, but for instance with this, it sounds like you all were very surprised at the costs of the ball fields in terms of operations and maintenance.
But you are exactly correct.
Okay.
In this survey, again, the intent was to get the ball rolling and
I'm not criticizing you.
No,
I'm
no,
just
no.
asking. I'm saying
Yeah,
keep-
and we added a lot of questions to the survey, like how immediate do you want things done or long term, and what are your priorities? So it's food for thought for us as we deliberate and figure out how to move forward.
Thank you.
I think it's important too, this is the first phase. The second phase is we're trying to evaluate our priorities. In order to do a community center, this is the amount that it will cost us. This is how much it will cost us to maintain it. How much do we want to go forward with that? So that's what you just described with the ball fields is where we're headed towards for all of our future projects. Make our decisions based upon how much it's going to cost and how much it's going to cost going forward.
To maintain.
To maintain it.
Any other questions?
Motion to
Going on.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you.
All right. I would like to very much thank all of you for participating. I hope it was informative. From a board perspective, there is value in these. Please talk to other people. Let them know what you heard. There is value in that. And we thank you very much. Have a great evening. There may still be a little wine outside. Get yourself one more glass, please. Thank you and good night.